Yeah, 8:07 a.m. and we are back here on KFYO Mornings. We're going to jump right over here to the phones, and as promised, we have Scott Braddock on line one, editor of the Quorum Report. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Dave. How are you?
Well, I'm about average.
Okay. Good. Not above or below, just average.
Hey, it's Friday, Dave. Dave's always happy on Fridays,
you
though.
bet.
He sounds very happy.
So Scott, I'm just going to jump right into it.
Yeah.
Now, one of the big things, and we've actually had a text about it as well, but it's been on local news, it's been on Texas news, is the whole deal with the plumbers. What exactly
National news, too.
Yeah, what exactly is going on with the plumbers, and is it really so important that they're going to need a special session?
It is, I think, possible, but unlikely. The governor has said no special session. In fact, he tweeted that out in all caps, almost Donald Trump style. No special session, and that was after this debacle with the plumbing board. I'll sort of explain this in a quick way here, and we can delve down further if you like. But what happened was each agency that the state has, all the state agencies, they come up for review every few years.
Right, the
That's part of
sunset
state
bill,
law.
right?
And it's called sunset because, if the legislature decides to not renew the agency, not reauthorize it, it's like the sun sets on it. It goes away. That's why they call it the sunset review. And the plumbing board was up for sunset review, and there was a bill that would reauthorize the agency and also do some things to modernize the agency. I mean, right now in Texas and all across the nation, there is a shortage of plumbers, and the labor force shortage is not restricted to plumbers. Of course, we have labor shortages in lots of the trades, almost all of the trades. There are two main trades that are regulated, licensed by the state of Texas. Those are electricians and plumbers, both very important for safety reasons to have those be licensed. And the agency that oversees plumbers is really out of date. And here's the main way in which it's out of date. And I think plumbers in Lubbock would tell you this, Dallas, Houston, everywhere would say that it is ridiculous, and I agree with this, it's ridiculous that to take your test to be a plumber in a state of 254 counties, 30 million people across 2 time zones, the only place you can take that exam is in Austin. Yep. You can't do it anywhere else. You have to travel to Austin to be able to do it, and that's why it takes as long as, in some cases, 8 months to be able to get your license to be a plumber. Now, there are union forces which would like to see more barriers to entry for people to be plumbers. This is a common tension between unions and business.
Right.
And the business guys and the Governor Abbott's office agrees with the business folks who say that, look, we still need to have it be licensed because it's important for safety reasons, but we would like to open this up for more people to be able to get into the industry. So what they wanted to do was move the plumbing board over to a larger agency called the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, and TDLR, and that would allow them to do those tests in other places and some other things, really modernize the agency and sort of break the logjam for people to be able to get into this industry. But what happened was there was disagreement in the Texas House at the end about how to implement that, and the bill simply failed. It went down narrowly, and then there was no sort of catch-all bill that would just extend the agency the way that it was already in existence. So lawmakers, by not passing those 2 bills, basically issued a death sentence to the agency. It will go away, and so does the state's laws that govern plumbers. And so the Speaker of the House earlier this week, sort of responding to the criticisms, had said, hey, look, local governments can still do this, and it's true that cities have ordinance-making authority to regulate what goes on with construction related to plumbing. But, you have a question of resources. I mean, places like Houston and Dallas, probably a little more easier for them to do that than it is for some small communities. Certainly, I'm sure Lubbock can do some version of this, but, in a lot of the smaller communities, smaller places in West Texas where we have listeners, it may be the Wild West when it comes to plumbers. And when they say that anybody can now be a plumber, that's sort of true, but there will be places where there will be some regulation, but it will have to be handled at the local level, the way this has worked out. I would say, as far as a special session, it would be smart if the governor wanted to do that. If he wanted to use, a special session to just have them, have the lawmakers come in and reauthorize that agency, and only do that and not get into the policy question of how to modernize it and just kind of save that for the next regular legislative session, they could do that in 2 days, guys. Yeah. They could come in and they could do it over a weekend. And the governor would be smart to continue to say he doesn't want to have a special session, but then call one immediately, maybe just call one instantly and abruptly, if you will, in July or August and say, hey, you guys need to come in on a Saturday and Sunday and just do this and then get out of town. Because if he doesn't do it that way, then there becomes pressure for him to add other things, like we saw in 2017 where he had a list of 20 items that the lawmakers were supposed to address in that special session. And, of course, what ended up happening was they only got to about half of them.
Yeah, and I think I kind of think he did that on purpose, though.
Sure.
So as far as this is concerned, is there, other than a special session, I mean, this just goes to local I guess, governments, but, I mean, is there any regulation at all, any, I guess, licensing at all for plumbers at this point in the state of Texas?
There would be no, based on what we have right now, this agency will go away, and the ability of the state to license that trade goes away.
But you're saying that cities could still demand that plumbers had a license to operate inside the city?
Well, what they would do is they could pull permits. If somebody has a permit to have a building, they could go in and they could do an inspection on that building. But as far as state licensing, goes away.
Now, and just a reminder, plumbers don't just fix clogged sinks and toilets. They work on. I think one of the things that people talk about were potable water, but the big thing that I look at is gas lines. I mean, you don't want somebody just off the street working on your gas lines, right?
You don't, and this is sort of like the other trades that are dealt with where they don't have licenses. You will see the sort of scab operators, the kind of the fly-by-night sort of people who come in and
roofers.
do things. Just like roofers, that's right. So you would have some people who are still the top-flight roofers, and they would be marketed as such, and they would work to get your business. But those are always going to cost more than the others who say that they can do it at a much cheaper price.
Which is why you get what you pay for.
You get what you pay for, and as you know, what always happens with this sort of thing, it's exactly right. What always happens with this sort of thing is people will go with the lowest price first, and then it's not right, and then they end up paying even more than they would have if they had just gone with that higher cost person in the first place, because they'll pay for the fly-by-night person first. The work is terrible. Then they go find somebody to do it right, and then by that time they paid probably 3 times what they should have.
Yeah.
Yep. That's why you call Comfort Masters, right, Dave?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I figured he would work a sponsorship.
Yeah, that's right.
Man, that is professional radio. Send this broadcast to the Radio Hall of Fame today.
I'm telling you. Now, just as a recap to the session, I mean, you had a question on here. Who comes out on top? Well, I mean, what are people saying right now about this special or about this session? I got a special session on the mind. We'll say it's a special session in that it wasn't partisan bickering. It's completely unlike 2017 or 2015 to a lesser extent. I think 2015 was a little more subdued. But this was a session in which you had Democrats routinely praising the Republican leadership for the way they were handling the 2 big items. As we talked about throughout the session here on KFYO in the mornings, the 2 big things were property taxes and school finance. And by all measures, they addressed those things. Now, they didn't address them in the ways that they originally had laid out. Remember, the big push on property taxes originally was going to be the caps for school districts and cities and counties, and while those were enacted, there was acknowledgement by the leadership, I think in April, when they first rolled out that big sales tax increase proposal, which flopped. That didn't go over so well. But in rolling out that sales tax proposal, they acknowledged that tax caps don't cut anybody's taxes, as we talked about here many times on the show. What they ended up with is caps for revenue with school districts at 2.5%, cities and counties at 3.5%. So that bends the curve on future growth and spending at the local level. And I think there's a lot of people who think that's a good thing, but where they really found property tax relief, quote unquote, is to put more money into public education. In the school finance bill, it ups the state's share of spending on public education from, I think, about 38% up to 45%, which will have the effect of leveling off property taxes for some people and actually maybe some reductions for other folks. But we're not talking giant reductions here. Don't go expecting a huge tax cut or anything, guys. As I said to someone else, don't go to Vegas just yet with all that extra cash you're going to have in the bank and roll the dice. It's not how this will work. I think the average
you're looking
is
at maybe a couple $100.
Yeah,
we're not
$150, $200 a year was the average, right. I think, for most people.
Exactly.
So,
we're not talking thousands of dollars here, which I know a lot of people, especially KFYO listeners, had said that they wanted to see more like $500 to $1,000 or more, and they would think that that was meaningful property tax relief. You're not going to see anything like that. So when it comes to winners and losers, I think basically the Republicans and Democrats sort of battled each other to a draw on this stuff. Republicans getting praise from Democrats, as I said, and I think in the places around the state where you might have a chance for Republican legislators to lose their reelection bids to Democrats next fall, places like Collin County, Denton County, Williamson County, Montgomery County, maybe not Montgomery, but Fort Bend and some other places where Democrats are ascendant. I think what Republican leadership is betting is that people are more upset about their property taxes and they love their public schools more than they don't like Donald Trump, who will be at the top of the ticket and will have down-ballot effect on some of those Republicans up for re-election.
Well, and I think Donald Trump's still pretty popular in the state of Texas, but I don't know about some of those districts. That's where it gets kind of scary.
That's where it gets scary, yeah. And, think about the fact that President Trump carried Texas by 9 points, which is, it's a pretty good lead, but it's not as high as Republicans in the past who would get more like 16 points.
It's better than Ted Cruz did.
Better than Ted Cruz, but that's a low bar, right? So if you look at that, the question will be whether or not the president maintains that sort of lead in Texas, where he's at 9 or 10 points. If so, I think those Republicans in those areas probably have a better shot to really battle it out with those Democrats who would be running against them. But if the president is at more like 5 or 6 points, well, I think that creates some real problems down ballot for people, in districts who won their races by 200 votes or so or less. In fact, there was one Republican in the Houston area who won his re-election in 2018 by about 50 votes. So you can kiss those guys goodbye if there's, a lower percentage win for President Trump here.
Yeah, Scott. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But you're the editor of the Quorum Report. Is there anything on quorumreport.com that you want to highlight?
Well, we have all the rundown on what's going on with that plumbing deal, and in fact, I think there's going to be a whole lot more policy discussion about that and exactly how it's all going to shake out, because the questions you asked are right on target, and I think, honestly, a lot of folks don't know all the answers to how that's going to play just yet. But we'll be delving into all of that and quite a few other things going forward at quorumreport.com. We've always got everything for the listeners there, what's going on with their state government and national politics, too, at quorumreport.com.
All right,
very
Scott,
good.
Thank you very much. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you all. Talk soon.
All right, bye.